Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the January meeting of the Transportation for Economic Development Policy Leadership Group. I'm Herb Marlowe. Let me review with you quickly the agenda for today, which you have by your seats. I'm going to overview with you the plan process for completing the business plan section of this work and project that you're working on. After I do that, Mike Williams of Hillsborough County will present to you our first detailed discussion of a group of key economic spaces, I-4, I-75, Sable Park, and CSX. We're doing this for two reasons. One, we want to have a content discussion today to talk about projects that you think are important in there, in addition to ones that the staff have identified. And secondly, we're illustrating a methodology today. We'd like your feedback on that in terms of how well it works, what we can tweak it. We intend to use this methodology as you modify it today in our future discussions. And then we'll have our first discussion of governance, our initial governance discussion today, which the managers will be joining you at the table for that. Our approach that we're proposing to you is we're going to look first at each of the key economic spaces by various groups, and you see on the chart in front of me the group we're looking at today. And I'll go through on the next slide a more detailed presentation of what those are. As soon as we finish that discussion of a group of key economic spaces, Commissioner Miller, you're up there. We'll begin a financial analysis. We'll look at cost and various ways to fund those. Once we have completed the full range of discussion about the key economic spaces and the funding, then that will come back to you to look at various funding strategies, both in terms of tools that you can use and strategies for about doing that in terms of how much you want to invest directly in some things, how much you want to have a set-aside war chest for specific projects, et cetera. As that discussion evolves, we'll then be starting to discuss priorities for you. Once you have established those and have concluded your governance discussion, that really creates a business plan. You'll notice down at the bottom there is the phrase public engagement with a question mark. I'm going to return to that after you've seen Mike Williams' presentation so I can get feedback from you if you feel there's important to have further public engagement and what forms you might like to take. So we will have that discussion today after Mike's presentation to you. I did want to say that most of the projects that you'll be seeing today, and all of them, have been through some form of public engagement. The question is what's appropriate now at this time. So, here are the key economic spaces. The one we're discussing today is at the top. Our plan and goal is to discuss in our February meeting the next three: Port of Tampa, Brandon, MacDill, Port Plant City, and Port Red Wing. Then our goal is in March to discuss New Tampa, USF, Temple Terrace, and if we are technically ready to begin the downtown West Shore Anderson Road discussion. If not, that discussion will occur in April. Part of why I have to be tentative about schedules, we also have the competitive sites coming on. Some of those will be in the existing areas. Some will be areas that are not, that are new and emerging, and so we need to allow time to discuss those. So, if you will allow some schedule flexibility here as we have that information. But our intent is to work very hard to try to complete this discussion in the time frame that I just reviewed with you. Within each of the key economic groups, where appropriate, we're going to be looking at four strategies. One is what we call optimization. In our December meeting, we talked about optimization with you in ways you can use the existing system better. The second is added capacity, and we'll be looking at a full range of tools to add capacity. However, it's also important to look at what we call live-workplace strategies. Where can you create communities so that people don't have to commute as much and reduce congestion through that? And finally, the whole issue of behavior change. We, as most Americans, are autocentric. How do we help choice riders do transit, to use bicycles, to walk, et cetera? So those are the four strategies we'll look at as appropriate for each key economic space. Not all will be for all spaces. But just to put it together, once you've discussed your funding strategies that you wish to move forward with, we have some projects and we have some direction from you on governance, that will all go into a business plan. And our intent is to try to get that completed over the summer or certainly by September at the latest. A lot of that just depends on the conversation and the depth you want to go at it, how fast we'll do that. But we will move as rapidly as you are ready to. This is just a summary. I'm going to skip those slides. Okay. So again, I'm going to ask Mike Williams to come. Now, he's going to present our first key economic group spaces, and show you the methodology that we're proposing to use. After he finishes his presentation, certainly if you have questions during that, please feel free. After he finishes, I'd like to come back to you and you just first talk to me about any particular projects in there that you think are particularly significant, and then I'd like to get feedback on the method. And then I'm going to come back and ask you to talk about your direction on public engagement. So, Mike, if you will.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. As Herb mentioned, we're going to start by talking about the process and how we're analyzing these different key economic spaces, and then we'll get into the specifics of the first key economic space or grouping of spaces that we looked at. So when we looked at these, we started with the job clusters that were prepared by the Planning Commission, which actually came out of census data and that kind of thing. So that's what we started, and that's kind of the little dots there. And then we grouped them into key economic spaces, which we presented to you before, and I believe the map here in front of the podium shows where the key economic spaces are around the county. From the key economic spaces, we decided that it would be important to look at what the network needs are within these spaces, or the transportation facilities needed within these key economic spaces. And along with that, you need to look at land use, because the land use can dictate to you what sort of improvements are needed. In other words, different land uses may drive you to different types of improvements. So that's kind of where we started. As we analyze these further, beyond the transportation needs in each of these key economic spaces, the spaces also have to have connectivity, meaning you can't isolate these and just say, okay, here you go. All you need to do is some work in this key economic space and that'll solve all the problems. They have to be connected and they have to work together. So the overall goal then would be to provide a system that's reliable, provides intermodal connectivity, and provides market access. So to work towards that, we came up with this concept of a spine system, the main roads and infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, and a spine network that I'll speak to now. So what we define as the spine is, we equated that to the FDOT's Strategic Intermodal System, or the SIS. Back probably 10 years ago or so, the Florida DOT decided that they needed to be strategic about their investments as well, and investments in infrastructure. So they came up with a plan to define hubs, what they call hubs and spokes. Hubs being the key economic drivers in areas where things come into and perhaps leave different areas of the state. And the spokes are the facilities, whether it's roads or rail or what have you, that connected these, i.e. that moved goods and people. So some examples in this county of hubs are Tampa International Airport, the Port of Tampa, etc. And then, of course, some of the spokes are the interstate system. There are some rail lines that connect, for example, the port to other parts of the state, and some of the major roads like State Road 60 east of I-75. And there's others too. So that's kind of how we define the spine system. The spine network then is the system of roads that could be DOT roads, it could be county, city streets, what have you, but it's those primary roads that support the spine or the main network of system. So we call that the spine network. And you'll hear me refer to it as the network as we go through this presentation. So just to kind of show you sort of what the spine looks like in this county, the spine includes, again, you can see the interstate system here, you can see the Veterans Expressway, the Selman Expressway, again, some of the hubs, Tampa International Airport, the Port of Tampa, et cetera. This is what the spine looks like in this county. Putting on top of that then here, we show what the spine network could look like. And the spine network, as we get into each area, we're trying to define what the spine network looks like. So this is kind of an example of what it could look like. And then add on top of that the key economic spaces, again, that are defined on the map that's attached here. Moving on, this is where we're making the connection to economic development. So the lines that are highlighted here really are the key point of this slide, and it's land that is more accessible, has greater capacity to support profitable business activity. And then reduced transportation costs are thus capitalized into higher land values. So by investing in transportation infrastructure, it will increase property values and therefore produce more profitable economic activity. So that's kind of the basis of how we approach this. Again, as Herb talked about, and is shown on the map in front of the podium, these are some of the groupings that we're going to be proceeding through as we work through this process with the committee. So, the first space that we analyze is what's circled in red here. It's kind of in the central or the middle part of the county, almost kind of the centroid of the county. To better define that, it's this area shown in red on the map. It includes some areas like Orient Park, East Lake, a little bit of Seffner, a little bit of Brandon. There's some city of Tampa in here, and it even touches a little bit in Temple Terrace. So to show you kind of what the spine is in this area, is again, which is the SIS, Strategic Intermodal System. Some of the spine facilities here, for example, I-4, I-75, the Crosstown or Selman Expressway, and you'll see that there are some freight, primarily freight rail facilities, freight today facilities in this area. Some of the network, as we started analyzing it, or some roadways like Orient Road, US 301, Hillsborough Avenue, MLK, part of Adamo Drive. There's some additional rail facilities that are shown in red in this graphic that are in this area as well. And then lastly, in this specific area, this graphic shows where the heart routes are, the current heart routes, again, in this area or this space that we analyzed initially. So when you start to look at the land uses in this area, this may be kind of hard to see, but this area of the county is mostly non-residential. There's a lot of light industrial, a lot of public spaces, and that's kind of what dominates this key activity center, or those are some of the key activity centers here. So just to kind of help orient you a little bit, we show here some of the key things that are in this area. For example, the fairgrounds. You've got the CSX Intermodal Yard in the lower part of this area. You've got the Hillsborough County facilities on Falkenberg Road. You've got J.P. Morgan Chase. Tampa Bay Steel, Net Park, just kind of some examples of what's in this area. Tampa Executive Airport as well. So if you just kind of took a very broad brush of the land use in this area, the northern part and the southern part are mostly industrial. And then kind of in the middle is more office and those kind of uses. Again, with some limited amount of residential spread throughout the area. So now that we understand the existing infrastructure and the land uses, we started to look at, well, what do we need here? You know, what's necessary? So because of the uses in this area, again, the light industrial, the office, those kind of things, it led us to, they need access to the spine system to move goods and mostly goods, but people as well. So if you have a plant where you're manufacturing some kind of widgets and you need to distribute them, your goal is to get to the spine as quickly as you can, i.e. in this case, maybe Interstate 4, maybe Interstate 75, so you can distribute them. So we mostly focus on roads, as you'll see, for this particular area. What these arrows show is some of the choke points or where the restrictions would be in getting to the spine from the spine network. So those will be on the spine network, and again, you want to get to the spine as quickly and efficiently as you can, so that's the connection there. And by making investments in the spine network in this area to get you efficiently to the spine, we hope to leverage the investments that FDOT would be making to the spine system, because again, that's where they're focusing their resources, the state. And we think it would be smart to try to focus our resources on the network again. So the ultimate goal being to reduce transportation costs by reducing delay in getting to the spine system. So this is probably kind of hard to see, but this is kind of the existing network. Again, this shows the spine in the black, the spine network. It also shows the existing heart routes on it. What just came up then is the existing, and then you add on top of it the projects that are already committed or already funded for construction. Whether it's FDOT, the county, cities, HART, whoever, those are the ones, because we tried to take that into account, what was already funded. If it was already funded, we didn't need to propose it as additional improvements. So this is maybe the slide we've kind of all been waiting for. Again, it has the committed projects, and then the projects that will be proposed or are being proposed as part of this package. And in your package, we better define the list for you. So you have some more detail in your package of what the projects actually are, but back. So it's yeah, so you have that in your package in a larger format that graphically shows where the projects would be. It includes a mix of projects. Some are road projects, there's transit projects, there's intersection projects. It's a mix of the 4 strategies that Herb talked about earlier and that we've presented to you before. So if we do nothing other than the projects that are already committed, that are already funded for construction, this is a graphic that shows what the network will look like, or the network will look like. So the more red, the worse it is. You see a few yellow segments. Yellow is better in this case, but essentially anything that's orange or red is overcapacity. If we make the improvements, you can see that it gets a little bit better. There's more orange, there's more yellow, more green, what have you. That's with the additional improvements proposed in the package that we gave you. But this really, in both of these last 2 drawings you can compare in your package. But that doesn't really tell the whole story, we don't believe. Because really what people care about is how long do they have to sit in traffic and wait, essentially? How long does it take to get from point A to point B? And that's really, I think, what people care about. So that led us to this slide. And what we're trying to show here, the first slide obviously is the existing condition. You know, there's a certain amount of delay today built into the system. The middle set of columns or bars there is how much additional delay per vehicle there will be if we don't do anything but the already committed projects. So you can see it's about a 25% additional delay in this particular area if we do nothing else. If we do the projects that we talked about or that we gave you in the package, then that additional delay is a little bit less than 10%. And with that,
Question, and I might have missed you explaining this, but on your potential 5-page project list, are any of those already funded? Are all of them funded? Are some of them funded?
none of them are funded. None of those projects.
Okay.
We removed from the list that you have, the separate list, anything that was already committed or i.e. funded.
So these are all proposed, potential, but not funded?
Unfunded.
Thanks.
They could be partially funded, you know, maybe if there's already a PD&E or something funded, but correct, they are not funded through construction.
And Mike, one more question. Are those ranked in any particular order?
No, sir. At this point, we didn't try to rank the projects either by importance or how they help the system, and I think Herb will get into that a little bit later about maybe down the road how we might try to do some sort of ranking of
But through the MPO or no other agencies, these are not ranked anywhere?
Not at all,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to turn first to the question of any content feedback in terms of as you look at the area, are there particular concerns you want to make sure get addressed? It's on. Sound picking up? All right. Test 1, 2, 3. Just like, I'll speak loudly for the audience. If you don't mind. Any particular actions or thoughts about this area? What we will be doing in future meetings before this is we'll be meeting and getting your feedback about those, but couldn't do it this time because we're getting the methodology ready. But as you know, the area would like to have any feedback. Commissioner Chris.
I think this is good work, and this is a great step forward. in helping us to open a window for visibility on where we should be investing. There's a component here that I think is missing that should also be there, that when we start looking at rate of return on our investment, it's the social economic impact on the various economic zones that we've identified. Because we could pick any one of these economic zones, and based on the social economic climate in and around it, we could have a greater or a less than impact. For an example, the university area with its high crime, if we were to invest in that area, not only would it require some of the improvements that are indicated here and the economic advantages that are obvious, but the decrease in crime, the improvement in quality of life would go to save money to the taxpayer and allow us to have more to invest somewhere else. So I think those factors need to be visible as well.
All right. So the feedback from you about that is, as we start to look at the criteria and move this list out with various criteria, not only are there traditional transportation congestion data, but other socioeconomic, social variables that we need to consider, as so you all can discuss those in your decision.
One other thing, when we start looking at the money factor, also looking at the possible empowerments that might be there in the area of stormwater mitigation dollars, brownfields dollars, any tax credits, federal and state level, that could be acquired. I mean, it gives us a more realistic picture on, if we choose this particular spot to invest, what chips are at play.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Commissioner.
Having said that,
Commissioner Miller.
having said that, though, if you look at what you've tracked on this map, you talk about the economic, socioeconomic environment of the people or those areas, and how you have businesses and transportation there. I mean, I think you've done a pretty good job. University area is one in particular. If we start looking at the areas that you're talking about, those areas are significant, and where we need to probably be looking on the I-4 corridor, I-75 corridor, leading around those areas, being the fairgrounds, East Lake, part of Temple Terrace. Those are major factors. The CNX area, the south part down there, and the Plants area. Those are areas where I think that as this county grows and businesses start looking at it, and we started looking at people that we hire, those are the areas that we're going to be looking at. How do we get people from these areas to those particular jobs, those hubs, those places that they got to get to work? How do we get them there? A lot of them won't have the opportunity to have cars. They got to have some type of transportation. And university area is one that we need to look at eventually. But I think that you've done a good job in looking at it, the future as to where we go with the businesses coming in here. We don't know what's going to happen around the fairgrounds. They're looking at bringing development there. That's going to be a major, probably thrust of area along there. I think you've done a pretty good job.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Hagan.
I think it's an excellent starting point, and I understand the basis of coming up with this list as far as providing congestion relief and connectivity to the spine. I guess my question is, where or when will we discuss the nexus between specific transportation improvement and our economic development goals or strategies or specific projects like that?
Once we have finished going through all of these, we need to go back, and that's really part of your prioritization discussion, in the sense of which of these are going to give you the greatest economic impact and payoff. So as y'all talk about prioritization, that's one of the key ways we have to look at it. We also have to look at it from other impacts. So once you've seen everything, then we need to go back and, because there are 52 projects here, and you can imagine the list once we get through everything. So we've got to sort them up, and part of that variable is clearly what's going to give you the greatest economic impact and benefit for that. Can I clarify, Commissioner? Okay. Commissioner Beckner, Commissioner Newman.
Yeah, thank you. And you touched upon the overlay with the existing HART networks, and I see where the map in front of me I show planned. Maybe it's just the map that either I'm not interpreting it right, or I don't have a map that's clear, but I'm not seeing the existing HART structure that you had referred to on the existing routes and things like that.
Mike, can you move back to that slide? That's the one that has heart, right?
Yeah, perhaps it's hard to see. This mouse, I don't know if you can see, but mostly the heart routes are they're different colors, different routes are different colors. More in the upper left part of this graphic. Yeah, those are the existing. You know, one thing, kind of a hub for Hart in this area is at Net Park. You know, a lot of their routes go through Net Park, and you can change buses there, that kind of thing, which is kind of. And then sort of the left side of this screen, or the left side of this graphic off of Hillsborough Avenue there. So a lot of the concentration of the existing routes are over there.
I guess maybe what I don't have, or what we don't have, or at least I'm not seeing, is the key that explains what all the different colors, because maybe that would provide some clarification.
And Commissioner, instead of us, let me just ask this, instead of us trying to show different routes, if we just had a color that showed all the Hart transportation, would that make it easier to see? I know there are many colors, and it starts to.
Yeah,
get
if you could do
confusing.
that, to provide that to us, and maybe even send a copy, because I'd like to have some more time to take a
Sure.
look at that, what that
Okay.
looks like.
All right.
But otherwise, I think we all have a good start here for what you're presenting.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Murna?
And I agree with all the comments, and I think you did a very good job to get this kind of kicked off and started. But to pick this area as possible nucleus really offers so much benefit, I think, to the residents. Number one, to the urban core, connectivity to downtown. I mean, I can even possibly see an intermodal center at this spot somewhere. People from South County can travel in. People from Wesley Chapel, USF can travel here. I mean, it's kind of a central, really part of what we're trying to do, and really engage the public into the transportation discussion, so that they can see how it's going to benefit them, how they can use it, what the needs will be in the future. And I think it's a great start. Congratulations. Can't wait to see the rest of it.
We can't either. But we'd like to get a little sleep between now and then.
No sleep.
Coming back
that.
to what Commissioner Miller brought up, you know, I think there's one source of data and in-depth information that would probably help you. Hart, getting ready for the referendum in 2010, did a very extensive AA study, alternatives analysis. Even though the board ultimately voted unanimously to shelf it before it was finished, that doesn't really take away from the value of the amount of material that's in there. All of the routes were analyzed in and out of the city, in and out of the core. All of the traffic was analyzed, all of the demographics were analyzed, all of the employment centers were analyzed. I mean, there's a wealth of material in that AA. And as you move forward, and this is my last meeting, so I thought I'd remind everybody now that that material exists. As you move forward to look at alternative modes, there's a lot of guidance contained in that AA. It's not old enough to be immaterial. Most of the data is still pretty valid. And I would urge you to match that up now as you move forward, trying to fill in the dots.
Thank you, and let me apologize to Mr. Suarez. I went to welcome him earlier, the new chair of Hart. And I know you all know him, but we're glad to have him join us.
Thanks.
And we're sad to see you go.
He's gonna take over for the fun part.
I think I'm more sad to see her go. Anyway, I got a couple questions, if I could. The list that you've called here, and I think you, Commissioner Beckner touched on this, that was, came from the, primarily our MPO list of projects that are already in the queue. Is that what it is, or?
Well, in part.
Okay.
There were a lot of sources. Some of them came from the long-range transportation plan. Some of them came from some of the county's plans that we have. Some of the Hart projects in particular came from the TDP that Hart recently updated. We got projects from the city of Tampa. We got a there were a lot of sources that went into this. It wasn't just the LRTP.
So some of it was wish list, some of it was things that have already been vetted through MPO and so on, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. The second question I had is, in terms of, have you looked at how planning is going to affect what these key economic spaces are going to look like? When you identify them and you say, this is what it's going to be, I do not know the county's planning, their comprehensive plan and what they are going to do, as opposed to what we are trying to do in Tampa. So is there are you using some of that information in order to go forward as to how do you identify those key economic spaces in relation to the zoning aspects? Because the biggest problem that most of the local governments have is balancing economic development with, folks that already live there, and how that's going to happen. And in addition to that, once they are living there, or that is the key economic space, as you like to call it, how do you deliver goods and services and people to and from their jobs? So has that been part of your discussion in terms of your plan?
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind that, the key economic spaces were initially came from the Planning Commission information. So that was sort of the basis of it. But along the way, yeah, we've been working with the Planning Commission. They're part of our working group. So we're not doing this in a vacuum, so to
I hope
speak. No, absolutely not. I mean, and I wanted to mention too, we've had meetings with Hart, City of Tampa, that we haven't been doing this by ourselves, just all alone. So, yeah, I mean, we have been coordinating with the Planning Commission, and making it so we're trying to think about the future too. I mean, our primary focus is on the next 10 years, or between now and 2025.
Well, let me interrupt you for a second, because I think you might have misunderstood what I was trying to get to, which is not that you haven't been doing your homework and you haven't talked to everybody, but it's the realistic application of what actually is happening in relation to these key economic spaces. I mean, the planning portion of it is just one part. I know that as on city council, a lot of times we go against whatever the recommendation of our planning committee is, or our planning department, based on other factors besides just, this is what it's zoned for. So I guess my point is that you're talking about an area that we want to have economic development as an economic development area, and how does that relate to what is already being done there in relation to what the future is going to look like? And that's something that's an unfair question to you,
Yeah.
really, Mike, but at the same time, it is something that is part and parcel of each other, because most well-developed transit systems and transportation systems are, they have developed over time and not necessarily planned out.
Sure.
And there's very few really well-planned communities out there that we can look to for.
And let me say one thing, and then I think Ron wants to speak, but part of the reason that we look at the existing land use when we're doing what we're doing is kind of what you're talking about. And this specific area, again, a lot of it is light industrial, and the uses in general in this area, we believe, are just going to get more intense. They're not going to get, it's not likely that we're going to go from industrial to residential for a particular piece of property. Could happen, I guess, but it's not like it's most likely going to get more intense. When we get into some of the more complicated, I'll say complicated areas, maybe like within the city or things, we're going to come with different types of solutions, and we're trying to think about the things that you're talking about. So with that, I think Ron wants to.
Sorry, Mike. I just thought I'd help. Maybe. Good afternoon, Ron Barton, Economic Development, Hillsborough County. One part of the answer to your question, only one, is, and this is probably to Commissioner Hagan's inquiry as well, that's where the competitive sites part of the process does begin to bring you that value. You have existing employment centers. That's what the key economic spaces were predicated on. No big surprise in our conversations with you earlier, the predominant key sites for development in the future are on these same spines, or are in these same areas. Doesn't mean it won't look that different 20 years, but in the next 10, it's not going to transform much. So the nexus to what you're asking is those competitive sites. So what we'll be doing for you at the same time as we bring each of these forward is we'll show you those 100, I made the number up, but it's 140 key sites in all of Hillsborough County, including our cities, that could help transform us in terms of jobs creation. Well, where are they in this mix, for instance? And so when you talked about how do you prioritize and use criteria, we're not there yet, but here's how to understand it. If we have 8 key competitive sites in this area, and you can make road improvements that not only make the system work better, but you favorably impact the value in the competitive position of those 8 sites for the next new job creation, that's where this really starts to come together. And so I think that's not the only way to answer your question, but that's the one way we think it's really going to be compelling for you, is you'll see existing job centers, but you'll see the sites that are going to transform us in the next decade, or have the potential to. And I would just say this, that the value of this thing, I like it when a plan comes together, whether we planned it or not. The neat thing about this is that you now have a view of the importance of improvements on the spine. You can see the improvements of the network that get you to the spine. And when we bring you the competitive sites, you're going to see particular obligations of those development sites themselves. And so what we're finding is, for instance, there are many development orders of some of these really important sites that pretty much say, do a study and come back. Well, that's nothing but uncertainty to a company or to a developer or to the community. And so that's where you'll see this thing really start to come together in a meaningful way, because what does that mean? Do a study and come back. You don't know whether that's $500,000 worth of road work or $5 million worth of road work. And so that's where the stepping of this process will work. And then you'll see funding that relates to the spine. A lot of these network improvements that have never been funded, but that we're going to put in front of you, we may find that a high percentage of those recommendations actually solve development order obligations of some of these key sites. We got to do the math, and we got to pull it forward. But I just wanted to see if, kind of connected in that way. And hopefully that helps a little bit.
Thank you, Ron. Great explanation. Let me just add to that as the conversation unfolds. It's each of you have visions and understandings of what these communities can become, and we need to have that as part of the conversation, because it's not just the land use today, but it's the direction you wish to take it, even that may take 20 years to work out. So that may or may not be particularly applicable to this site, but some of them we're moving to it will be very applicable. So we need to have those. Any other feedback on method or other comments? Mike, thank you. As you all know, there's a project management group from staff of all of you sitting here, and Hart and Thea, that meet every Friday. They all are working very hard. I would be remiss, however, if I did not acknowledge today the contributions of John Patrick to our work here. He's just put a lot of hours and time in. He's done a great job of getting us this far, so I'd like to thank you, John. Let me move forward real quickly on that. Okay, I'd like to return now to the conversation about public engagement. What you've seen today is one sample. When we've completed this, we'll have for all the key economic spaces, plus the competitive sites, as Ron just alluded to. And our goal is trying to get this substantively complete by June, if we can. Once we have identified this stuff and worked through the details at the staff level, we'd like to know if you'd like to have some form of public engagement, and if so, any particular interest you have in that. So if I can have some reaction from that, Commissioner Merman.
Thank you, Herb, and thanks for asking that question, because I do think at Hart, our last board meeting, we had this presentation by the Polk Transit Group that developed their, quote, My Ride plan. And one of the most important parts of, I think, what they went through to develop their plan was their public outreach. And I feel that as we start to funnel into making a decision, that we have to do some public outreach, or we have to do a public outreach effort. And I don't mean a survey, that's going to necessarily be asking for what voters think. I'm talking about just a pure information gleaning from the desires of our consumers here in Hillsborough County, which is really what Polk did. They went to Starbucks, festivals, you name it, they went there. And I think that that's what helped get them to their final solution and their funding solutions for their problems. And I think, in other words, it's crafting a study to study valid conversations with people, not asking for what the voters do, like I said before, but asking for penetrating consumer information, technical stuff, feedback that wouldn't necessarily be geared towards a specific solution, but more technical information about what they desire and want out of a system. Not necessarily what they would vote for, because again, I think you're going to get political, and I think that's why Polk's was so successful. They did 10,000 residents. Obviously, we could do more than that, but I think examining their plan gives us a lot to base our decision on. Because in Hillsborough, which is different than Pinellas, we're going to have a lot more validity in our recommendations as far as really what supports us. And I think we'll learn a lot about regional mobility desires of people, the expanded access that businesses want in this area, and then increasing our economic development efforts, which give us the competitive advantage. So I know that we're discussing with the Stanford Change Labs group, and they're geared more in bringing people like us together and all the plans and everything and try and get agreement. And whether we do that or not, and I ask you all, I hope you'll agree with me that we do need a public outreach effort. And it could be the same company Polk used or whatever, but I do think it will give us some very specific, valid information we need from the consumers in our area.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Wagner?
Well, I would absolutely agree with that, Commissioner Merman, because I think what we learned from the 2010 referendum, after they did their focus groups, there's a lot that we could have learned before we went out to the referendum. And the focus groups that the MPO had done provided valuable insight to what people's thoughts were around transit. And that happened to also obviously focus on their thinking about the referendum itself. But somehow outreach with focus groups, I think we definitely need to do that, put this together. I'm not sure exactly at what stage you go out with that, if you go out with it in small stages or you develop a whole entire comprehensive plan and go out with it. I might lean towards the latter, but then again, there may be valuable things that may change our thoughts if we go out in smaller chunks. So, but I think we definitely have to have extensive public outreach and feedback group from the community.
And yes, and I agree. Thanks for the suggestions, and I think we just should charge you with coming back to us with your recommendation. And talk to the people in Polk County, definitely.
And I give at least nonverbal.
I would talk with Polk. I would also look at what the MPO had done and how they had conducted their focus study groups, and and then perhaps then come back with some recommendations.
We'll come back to you in the next meeting with some ideas and approaches based on what Polk's done, what Planning Commission MPO already did, and what's particularly unique to this project, in the sense of it has its own features that need to be addressed. So we'll come back and you can look at it then in terms of that.
I think each one of us would love to sit in Starbucks for a couple hours once a week, have
Lots
a
of
cup of
conversation,
coffee, just
Commissioner
talk to
Sharp.
people. Hey, Mark does it. Mark does it once a week already.
Yeah, he's already ahead of the game.
Let me take a little, maybe we need to move to a bigger venue than a Starbucks.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, maybe we need, it's good to have some consultant do this whole thing of studying and talking to people and bringing back the figures and the numbers and putting them on a slide presentation. But what about this group going out talking to people? Why don't we go somewhere?
Sure.
There are venues that we can go to in this area and other areas and let people come and tell us what their thoughts are, instead of someone telling us what their thoughts are. And I'd rather sit there and hear what John Q. and Mary Q. Public has to say to me than what a consultant has to say.
No offense taken.
I've been a consultant before, I'm sorry. But I'd rather hear from them and their thoughts. I'm not saying we don't need a consultant to do this, but I'd rather hear from a meeting at the All People Center or somewhere in the University Mall or University area or out in the East Lake area. Let them tell us what their thought processes will be. I think that's a better, I'm getting the feedback myself. We all need to get that feedback. So I think that's
Yeah, and it's
important.
not either or. You can have both. And if you choose that, we'll give you a model.
I think that's very valid for us to go out and get that feedback. The more important thing also is to make sure it's just done methodically, because if you were to do all your feedback sessions down in City of Tampa, you're going to get one set of feedback there, versus if you go out in the county and the East Hillsborough County, you'll get another set. So we just need to make sure it's just done methodically, and that we get a good cross-section and representation of what the county's thinking, because at this stage, if we're looking towards a potential referendum, or we really want to, if we're doing this comprehensively, it's going to take, at this stage at least, an entire county to.
That's why I said take it all over the county. Because in 2010, that's when I ran for this county commission. And we got out, when I was campaigning and got out into Palm River and Riverview and Progress Village, it was like, what is that referendum going to do for me? Because the message wasn't out there. That's why I'm saying that we need to go to every nook and cranny we possibly go to and hear what the public has to say.
And I think Polk did a combination of both. I think they had the community forums, plus they also sent people out like to the heritage festivals and the fair or whatever they did. They did a combination of both, so they got a good cross-section of people. They went out to people and not necessarily asked people to come to them. So I think they did both.
Well, certainly the managers can attest from our priors. We were around last fall. We certainly heard different perspectives from the different parts of the county we were in. So, okay, we'll build that all into the proposal we bring you in the February meeting. If I can ask the managers to join us at the table from the groups here, if you would, please come on up. We'd like to turn now to a discussion of governance. Clear off the space here. We have a monthly meeting of what we call managers and administrators, who review the work of the project management group and provide direction on the agenda today. And one of the topics that we have raised and had discussions internally is, as this unfolds, is there any need for a governance mechanism? So we'd like to have that initial conversation with you today, and based on your direction, the conversation will move forward or not on that. I'm going to ask Mike Merrill to open the conversation, if you will. So, Mike, if you could.
This has been a topic of conversation in the last couple of meetings, and I guess the way I would explain it is that we all know how critical handoffs are in life and sports and business and medicine. The quarterback to the running back, the relay runners. In business, it's the product designers to the product manufacturers. There are lots of business case studies that show product designers were designing one thing, they took it to the manufacturing floor and said, we can't build this for a price that people will buy it for. Medicine, landmark studies that showed the highest mortality rates occurrence in emergency rooms happens during shift changes, between handoffs between one shift to another. So I would suggest that it's especially critical for this group to be thinking about the handoff. So all of the great work that's being done here to develop the vision, pick the projects, talk about the funding, is only as good as who's going to implement it, who's going to make this thing real, who's going to be accountable for it. So the analogy that I use in the working group is, let's take Tampa International Airport, for example. It's a multimodal operation. They have planes, they have the passenger or the people mover, they have cargo, they have rental cars, a number of different modes. And if Joe Lopano had to depend on 5 different agencies or entities, each of which had control over their one discrete piece of the modal puzzle to try and run an airport, it would be a disaster. That's why Joe Lopano and his board of directors are in control of all of those modes to make sure they come together so that people check in, they can get to their plane, the baggage gets there, they get a rental car. So we all get the idea. So basically, I think for us, there's a threshold question for this group, whether you all believe that it's necessary for there to be a governance entity that survives or that takes the handoff from this group and that is accountable to pull all of the many modes together, to fund it, to build it, and to operate it. And if the answer to that is yes, that you do believe that's important, then you can kind of move down the road and start answering other questions about, you know, how quickly does that have to happen? You know, who should be the leadership of that group? You know, what entity is it? You know, I would suggest if we all believe that time is not our friend and that time is of the essence, you would want to look for the quickest turn, for the opportunity for the entity that could be on the ground the most quickly to take the handoff and start planning, designing, and building this. So that's kind of the premise behind the concept of governance, and I didn't want to I purposely didn't want to talk about a specific entity or entities that might be options, but that's something we can do. But it's really answering the threshold question. You know, who do you hand it off to is really important. So
Before I open discussion, let me just see if any of the managers would like to make a comment. Jerry, anything you want to say?
I'm good with what Mike has offered.
Okay, Jean?
I don't really have anything different other than to reinforce what Mike has said. I think we all have seen from just even small projects, you have a task force, you have a focus group, to have those as a set of priorities they're working under, you have a much better chance of pulling off your project than if it's spread amongst different agencies or different departments. So I think everyone pretty much can agree with those concepts, and I completely agree with Mike's suggestion that we really need to get trust and credibility with our constituents, our citizens, that if we can make a case for the need of this, we can show that we have the means to take it to the next level of implementation, so.
Okay. Philip, any comment, John?
Basically, I think that the approach of governments has been an ongoing issue. Based upon my past experience, the issues have dealt around whether it's the Council of Governments, NPO, down the process. I think what's important is if there's a decision around governance, it had to be tied to, one, who manages the funding, but who implements. And then putting those two together is going to be can be a challenge, and I think that's something that really has to be considered.
Okay. Greg, any comment?
I don't know what the county administrator just said, but I agree with it wholeheartedly.
The check is in the mail to Plant City.
Well, we have had a lot of dialogue about this very issue, and it's critical from the manager's perspective that we have accountability and credibility. Having this entity work through this process and identify the issues and the direction that you want us to go has been extremely helpful. Moving forward from that point, how we talk about projects, what we talk about as far as project timelines and delivery, project funding, that's going to be critical. We fully expect that there's going to be an issue where we have to join together, whether it's through interlocal agreement or some other mechanism to fund some of these critical projects. It's going to be key to demonstrating we can get it done, and we can get it done in a timely and effective way. So we're anxious to hear your thoughts on the governance model, but keeping in mind the fact that we have to have credibility and accountability, I think is going to be essential in helping us craft what we need to do.
And Ray?
Thank you. I echo what Greg said. I mean, the system we have now is one, and the NPO is largely a planning agency that deals with all these different implementing agencies, is to decide what is it that we're going to talk about? How far down the food chain would another organization or a existing organization go? Because we go all the way from local streets to interstates. And right now, each level has basically a different governmental jurisdiction responsible, FDOT for interstates, and some arterials, the county for certain major arterials, the city for other roads. That's the system we have now. Can that work with where we want to go, or do we need something else? That's really, I think, the question we need to explore.
Herb, if I could just add something.
Yes, sir, please.
I want to echo something that Greg said a few moments ago. We're all in management by choice. You know, we're here to implement public policy. And at this juncture, we've had a lot of conversations on this issue about the importance of having a structure of some type in place that allows us to implement and get done what you want to get done. We're really at a place where we need your direction on how you'd like to see this handoff occur.
Question before you is, any discussion you want, but basically I'd like direction is, do we want to continue this conversation? It'll be part of our standard agenda. If you do, Commissioner Beckner.
Thank you. I have actually a pretty strong opinion around this because, you know, we started this topic is based around transportation. And I think part of the issues, we know that transportation goes well beyond just the actual physical modes of transportation. We know that there's many things that come into play, from road designs, et cetera, that could touch and involve a lot of different agencies. But for me, it's pretty clear that at least for the basic agency that handles transit in Hillsborough County is HART. And looking at the existing structure of HART, they have probably right now the broadest representation as far as representing the different municipalities, part of the state interest, the county interest. I don't think that it's sufficient in its current existing structure to be able to fill and have representation from all of the different angles that it touches. But I think that's, for me, that's the starting point. And so some of the suggestions that I might have is that we take the basic structure of HART and look at the expanding the board membership. Obviously, if Plant City is joining us, representation from them. If the mayor feels strong enough about, even though he appoints somebody already, perhaps it's appropriate that he sits on it. We have ex officios that could include FDOT, it could include the MPO, it could include our economic development department from the county and the other municipalities. But I think the basic structure in HART is in place. I don't know what it takes to change that structure, but you know, they right now are the ones that are collecting the ad valorem, and I just think that there should be the agency that directly handles transit, and we should just look at expanding it and look at the membership. I don't think we need to create another level of bureaucracy and another layer of government. We've got too many as it is. I think we need to have one functioning agency that's able to address transit needs, economic development needs as it relates to transit, and that's kind of my opinion, and that's what I feel
Sticking to it?
pretty strong about that.
Okay. I'd like to hear all of you. I would request, however, we not finalize the decision today. We'd like to have an opening conversation and have some discussion over the months. That's certainly a clear option, well stated. Anyone else like to state a thought? Commissioner Mervin?
I actually feel very strongly about this. I actually made this recommendation to our administrator probably about 6 months ago. I think everybody just like, whoa. But I do think we need to pick a legal entity that's already in existence, because for us to create something would take a lot of time, a lot of legal work. We'd have to hire an attorney, you know, be a lot of different things. So, and I think dealing with the different jurisdictions, we're already, it's exactly what Commissioner Beckner said. The different jurisdictions are already involved in HART. My only desire is that we keep it to elected officials. Now, I know the governor has appointments to HART. I don't, maybe he'll consider me again. I had to throw that in. I have to throw that in. I know, se habla español. Anyway, no, I think that it needs to stay with electeds.
Okay.
I think that we are, people vote us into office to make these decisions, and especially to spend their tax dollars, and needs to stay that way. And I think we all stay together in one group. I'd like to see us morph into the transit authority, the Hillsborough Transit Authority, to really get this thing going forward. And I think it would give us, help us with time and with leadership. Some of those basic things you've talked about, trust, credibility, accountability, all those things, we'd be going to an entity that has those established already.
Commissioner Chris.
You know, I take a different tact. I look at this as a bigger picture than just the transportation component. I mean, this is truly an economic development partnership. We have representatives from each of the governing entities here, and if we're looking at handing this off to a team, that team needs to be made up with responsible people who are accountable to the public, that can basically have the lateral ability to maneuver within the appointing authorities they're representing. And I see whatever we hand this off to being a partnership, not another layer of government, but a partnership of our governments, whether that be creating an authority where each of us appoint to that authority, and we add to it you know, representatives from each of the cities and the county, also HART, DOT, the airport and the port, so that transportation is well represented, but it not being solely led and housed within a transportation entity where it becomes just a transportation initiative.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Mr. Suarez.
I'm the new kid on the block, even with a guy with as much white hair as I have. I gotta say, there are a couple things that we need to have more clear direction on, which is, what is this group actually looking at doing? Is it a group primarily for economic development needs and concerns, and how does that create some kind of entity within the transportation group? I think for myself, HART's problems are more in terms of it being a suburban system with an urban ridership. We don't have the same kind of governance that we would need in order to run a more effective bus system. I think having two members from the governor does nothing for us, and that's no offense to the two people who are sitting on the board now. It's just that the governor's role in this is very narrow and very small. I would not like to expand it. I'd rather see it that it's proportional to the number of groups that are a part of it. I think if Plant City joins us, that'd be great. We have a member from Plant City and also from Temple Terrace, as we do now, plus our three members from the city and maybe 4 from the county. I think that if you streamline it, you'll be better off in terms of transit. But we have to be very clear that HART's mission is always about delivering folks from point A to point B. It isn't really about the economic development side of it. And that's been a big concern of mine, because we started talking about transit-oriented development, some of the silos that we all sit in, that we don't do enough of reaching out and figuring out how do we connect transportation to jobs, to these key economic areas. And because of it, I think it's too big to put under one roof. I think that we need more clear direction from both the city government and the county governments, the city governments and the county government, in terms of their leaders as to what they want to implement. It's a little bit easier when you have a mayor. He has, being a strong mayor, and he reminds me of that all the time, being a strong mayor.
That's why he allowed you to sit on his right hand today.
Well, I noticed that. I made sure both his hands were on top of the table here, so, anyway, but having a strong mayor is a little bit of an easier governance system for us because he has control over the executive side, we have control over the ordinance and the legislative side, and it makes it a little bit easier to figure out which direction we're gonna go in, and we can communicate and fight and do whatever we have to do, but at least, at the end of the day, you do have an executive. County doesn't have that, and because of it, I think we need to make sure that the folks here that are from the county understand that. I think that's what we need more, is someone from the county side that's gonna say, all right, this is the person that's our lead guy on this, and he will control all these aspects concerning economic development in relation to transportation. Because I think it would be extremely helpful to us on the city side, and I think extremely helpful to Hart to have that kind of leadership.
Okay. Commissioner Hagan.
Well, I guess start out with, I think this is an excellent discussion, excellent place to start, and I think it'll probably take, several meetings to ultimately get to where we want to go. But to kind of answer Mike's question, the original focus of this when we started, actually when Mr. Merrill rolled it out, was to come up or to create a new paradigm that aligned our transportation objectives with our economic development goals. It's something that we had never, we've never done on a macro basis. We've had a couple of isolated instances down in South Shore with ultimately Amazon came, and then out in Brandon with Bass Pro, but we've never done it on a macro basis, so it was kind of going in a new direction. I agree that I don't think we need to create a new bureaucratic organization. I don't believe the public has any interest in that, and that would be a bad sign. But to go along with what Commissioner Chris said, I don't think we should lose sight of the economic development and job creation component of our mission. And how we morph that or how we get there, I don't know. But I do agree that we shouldn't lose sight of that.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Beckner.
And those are all extraordinarily valid points, and that's why I say the existing structure as Hart exists today wouldn't meet those goals. And that's why I think if you look at taking that existing structure and developing some and having discussion around who is missing from the table, because certainly the leaders around economic development, from the city and the county, they need to be a part of that discussion. And that's where I think what's missing today is we've got all these entities working separately from one another. If you can create a structure where those individuals would be participate as ex officios and have an active role and helping us balance economic development with the transportation issues, I think you have a more viable structure there that can meet both transit and goals for economic development in our cities and inside the county.
Okay. Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Merman.
I think that
we need to proceed with what the administrator suggested. I agree with Commissioner Beckner. I don't think the existing structure is capable, and it's certainly not capable of doing what I completely agree with Commissioner Hagan. When he spoke last time and said he was looking for a game change, and he talked about this new paradigm, we're not going to get there with what we've got. So I'm concerned that at the pace we're moving, my son who's 12 will be sitting on the District 7 seat making some of these decisions.
Jake is 11.
My son's 11. Damn, he's going to lose out to you again for the chairmanship.
And both of them stay away from my daughters.
You're the strong mayor.
Get it all worked out. But I really think that we need to move.
Sure.
Even in the first part of the conversation, I'm still concerned that we're not looking at the game change component. not looking for, just an errant home run, but I think we need to be really focusing on how we're going to move the economy forward. So organizationally, yes. If it's HART, I think it should be HART, yes. It should be capable of handling P3. It should be capable of basically dealing with new elements of transportation, which in the past perhaps didn't exist or wasn't relevant.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor Lott, and then Commissioner Murray.
Just a minor comment. My understanding was anything we did would incorporate economic development anyway. And I think that any authority that we set to work for us on our behalf is going to, we're going to set the guidelines for any projects, anything that comes before us. Just because it's called the Hillsborough Transit Authority doesn't mean that it just deals with transportation. Maybe we change the name to better reflect what we're going to do, but absolutely the two have to be linked, and we have to set the guidelines for these decisions that we're going to make as we go. And it wouldn't just be transportation, it'd have to be linked to creating jobs. So I'm hoping that was the understanding, and also the fact that we need to hear from our legal people, because we know that there are charters involved, there are, how do we engage the public in this, that type of thing.
Okay. Vice Mayor.
I apologize for being a few minutes late today. I think it was 4 or 5 minutes. But 2 meetings ago, Commissioner Hagan, you, to me, was very enlightening when you said, it seems like we constantly start talking about all these large overall rail, light rail, all these transportation projects and everything. And you said the reason why we created this was to be able to do basically what the county commissioners did with Bass Pro Shops, okay? And I wasn't at the very first meeting, so I had missed that. So it was, to me, great to hear that vision, because I was still trying to search what we were really trying to accomplish, okay? Since then, I've had lots of conversations with our staff, a lot of Hillsborough County staff and so forth. And I think it's hard for us to figure out how to govern something until we know what we're governing, And so I almost think it's putting the cart before the horse until we come up with what is this plan, how are we going to send, how much money, how are we going to raise the money, and kind of figure out, if some company from Wyoming wants to open up in South Hillsborough County, what's the process, what can they get, how's the, what is that project, does it sit inside the areas we want to influence, transportation growth? So, I do agree with governance and so forth, but I hope we stick to the vision of dollars being targeted to a specific job, that we can account for the number of jobs and the payback from that investment. And I think once we figure that out, then I think it'll be very clear who should govern it.
Okay. Commissioner Miller.
Now, let me say to the people, the young kids, my grandkid could serve as now on this commission. They couldn't serve as chair, but they are Democrats.
The Republicans would say you're raising him wrong.
Mike, you might want to write this down. I do agree to a certain extent with what Victor Chris said, and that's kind of strange that I do that. But I think that Mr. Lott hit it on the head. I think that we need to come back and step back today and think about and discuss more of where we're going and how do we get there. This whole transit is going to tie into economic development, like everyone said. But do we want to get to the point of creating another authority? I don't think we want to do that. I don't think right now we want to do that. I think if we have more discussion, that it may be the point we want to go. But I think Mr. Lott put his hands around it, and talking to Commissioner Hagan, we got to come into being as to what we really want to do. What do we want to do, and where do we want to go, and how do we get there? Who pays for it? We got to put a plan in place that's going to deal with transportation and economic development, because if we start talking about economic development, the people got to get there. And how do they get there? So I think that one of the things we need to do, and it's not going to happen today. It might happen in the February meeting. It might happen in the March meeting. But I think we're all going to have to sit back and brainstorm about where do we go, And how do we get there? Does it take looking at increasing and giving a new direction to Hart? I don't know. I don't know if we need to create another authority, because that might be another message, another layer of government, and here's a Democrat talking about another layer of government that we may not want to go through. But it might. It might. I don't know. But I believe that we're going to have to sit back and think about this and have some more discussion on it than one afternoon in about 30 minutes to put this together as the way we want to go. Economic development is a major factor. Since some of us have been here since 2010, that's been a major talk of economic development, bringing jobs to Tampa, Temple Terrace, Plant City, and Hillsborough County. We could talk about that, but how do we get the citizens there? I mean, that's the important thing. How do we structure what we want to bring to the people? We don't want to do what we did in 2010, because it's going to fail again. We want to be ready to bring it to the people of this county and say, this is what we really need. But we got to have some group, some people that can really put that into place, and it could be a hybrid of what we're talking about. But I think that's something that we have to think about, and how do we get there? And it's just not going to happen today by 3:30.
And no intentions to. This is the initial conversation. Councilman Suarez, Commissioner Beckner.
I think one of the problems that we have here is this. Any transit system, and I think any transportation system that we have, I don't think that there is any of them in the United States that deals with economic development as part of their governing operation. So I think we're kind of at cross purposes. Mr. Sharp talks about a paradigm shift. The paradigm shift is primarily on the leadership that we provide here to make sure that we can go forward and provide the kinds of dollars that we need to provide the economic development incentives for people to come down here. And that includes transportation and an effective transportation network. I think part of our problem is that we're talking about two different things, economic development and transportation. I don't think that HART as a board or HART as a system or any transportation system that governs now can be the overarching controller of where economic development dollars go, or how economic development is going to be. Transportation serves the needs of the people and serves the needs of the businesses, not the other way around. So I think we need to kind of think about that in that way. Secondly, I think that if economic development is the preeminent reason for doing something, it has to be something different then. It can't be through the transit system. The transit system's only purpose, and in fact, I think, and I may be wrong about this, and I know Chip Fletcher's back here and the lawyer will tell me something in a minute, is that when the federal dollars come to us, it's to run a bus system, not to worry about economic development. And in fact, that's part and parcel of something that's completely different. You can have entities that, as an example, as HART, we have the power to still do eminent domain proceedings, and we get pieces of land, and we can enter into contracts and partner with other people to provide economic development incentives. But that's not something that we have done in the past. That's something that we need help on. And that's something I think that the county can help us on. But I don't think it's something that we do best. And that's part of the problem. And he mentioned, Mr. Sharp mentioned about P3s. P3s are already in existence, and all P3 is that we can contract with someone to provide the service to us. But that still means federal, state, and local dollars have to go to that private partner in order to run or to develop the system. So, everything's here for what we need. I just think that we need a better conduit for the economic development piece. That's my...
Commissioner Beckner?
Thank you, and Councilman Suarez, I think you really hit a very strong point right in the head, because my concept coming in here with this group is that we were talking about transportation infrastructure in the county. And how economic development is tied into that is I absolutely and strongly agree that there is correlation, and we need to plan transportation to help promote economic development, make sure businesses, I believe that that all ties in together. But what I'm hearing today is that there is a desire for something to drive, or some agency to drive economic development, and I don't think that that's the purpose. Certainly HART would certainly not do that. We've got a few different economic development agencies right now. Inside the county, we've got our own department. We've got the EDC. I'm sure the city's got theirs. So what we need, though, are the economic development engines and those organizations to participate in helping the plan transportation and make sure that we understand the needs of economic development as it relates to transportation and how that's tied together. Not to have one agency inside of a transportation agency driving economic development. That wouldn't be the purpose for HART, and that's why when I made the suggestion that I did, it's to have somebody that at least can represent economic development and bring that and tie all that in together, or multiple people.
Mayor Barcon, I apologize I missed you, so.
Maybe just to sort of move this discussion along, I don't know that I would say that there's a consensus, but there certainly seems to be a prevailing thought, and I think Commissioner Beckner started the discussion off, that as we move forward, that in its current configuration, given the politics of the appointments and sort of the makeup of the board, that HART is not prepared nor capable of being the agency that will lead this discussion further down as we get to an implementation process. Whether it's the addition of rail, whether it's the addition of, bus rapid transit, which they're already doing very successfully, I might add, but that I think it needs a fundamental change. And I think what Commissioner Beckner said in terms of perhaps expanding the role, but more importantly, expanding the diversities of opinions that are on that board and bringing together to the table decision makers who can speak for their respective jurisdictions. Because as we go through this process and as we go to the voters eventually, I hope sooner rather than later, they're going to want to know that whatever entity it is that's going to be managing their money is an entity that's capable of delivering a product. We don't know what it would take at this point to reconfigure that relationship. We don't know what the authority regulations are. Perhaps we would be best served by asking Mr. Merrill to come back at the next meeting with sort of a roadmap as to how a reconfigured transit agency that reflects what I think I have heard here today could be formed. I honestly don't know, Mike. I don't know what it would take to get it done. But I think what Commissioner Christ and Commissioner Hagan said about, and Commissioner Miller about, we don't want to add another layer of government. That's the absolute last thing that we want to do. We want layers of government that are effective and that are efficient and that actually deliver. And, they are the FTA recipients. None of the rest of us can get FTA money from the federal government. When you talk about a partnership, particularly on rail, they are the vehicle, literally and figuratively, by which money will flow to this community. I don't think the rest of us want to go set up and become a recipient of FTA dollars when you already have in place through HART the ability to do that. But I don't think they are the agency to get us to the next level. And I would like to know what it would take to rebuild that, reconstruct it, reconstitute it to the point that we are all at the table, and those of us who are in positions of authority representing jurisdictions can speak equally forcefully to the economic development component of it, just as we can to the transportation component. You get two for one if you have different players at the table. So, I don't know if we need to make a motion to do that, or if Mike can just do it unilaterally.
I'm sort of need some nonverbals. You like that? We need to have this conversation over several meetings. It's a complex issue, as long as we. But unless I hear some objection, we'll come back with some further details and options for you, so that you can, have a full discussion of all tools that are open to you and what it would take. So we'll certainly do that unless I see some nonverbals. Commissioner Chris.
I'm going to throw a hot potato in the air that, I just went online and I was looking at their mission statement, and I have never really had the desire to have to do that in the past. I just read it, but it's an authority that's already in place, and it's one that we all need, we all use, and we all hate. And this could be an opportunity for it to morph into something that could be even more useful than they've been in the past, and that's the Planning Commission. That's the one entity that's cross-jurisdictional, and it's where we got all this data that we're crunching today. And when you read their mission statement, this is very clearly written into it. And, maybe it's time to go back and revisit that mission and their purpose, and to see how they could be the catalyst to bring these components together, because HART is a very valuable component, but it's not the single player. And in order to make something like this move forward, we've got to have all the decision makers at the table with the data and the capacity to facilitate the agenda. And that's one thing that I do know the Planning Commission has is capacity.
Commissioners, before you go comments, we're trying to work this process very methodically. And what I would suggest to you is let's let the managers work on this and bring you back the full range of options that are out there. HART's certainly there, Planning Commission, whatever else is there, so that you can look at it all and feel comfortable you've fully surveyed your options before you make your choices. Commissioner Beckner?
Yeah, and first and foremost, again, the mayor, I think, so eloquently did that, demonstrates why he's such a good, strong mayor that he is. But it does begin with who controls the purse strings, who has the dollars, and there are no other, how many taxing entities do we have in Hillsborough County that's established? We can collect ad valorem, HART can collect ad valorem, and who else that would pertain to what we're trying to accomplish can actually do that? And that's why T-BARTA has been such has issues with it itself, because it has no purse strings, it has no dollars. HART has the dollars. And to have another agency oversight of HART, I don't think that just makes sense. Yes, HART needs to be reworked. The structure, I think, needs to be done, but the funding mechanisms are in place. They certainly have the capable and competent staff that knows transit. They've been doing this for years, so I look at that as the base organization. Where I think is discussion is how is it that we, again, make sure that the appropriate representation is in place in HART, that make sure that issues of economic development can be addressed, that, again, whatever issues that we want to make sure are heard and put in the planning process can be addressed. I just cannot see us creating another taxing authority and going through referendums and stuff like that. There's no need to do it. It's here. We just need to restructure what we've got.
Yeah, I hear pretty clear direction. Let's don't begin with a new authority. Let's look at what we have here, see how it could be restructured to work. At the end of that, you're not satisfied, then you may have to go to a different discussion, but we'll start with what's in place.
That's crystal clear, isn't it?
Yes, sir, it actually is. That one's crystal clear. Mayor Schuler?
Sure, thank you. And first of all, I think it's extremely helpful to all of us. This exercise has been very beneficial to get all the feedback, and you have all the decision makers at this table. As long as I've been serving on the city council for 8 years and now as mayor, and never have I been part of a group where you have the muscle of the whole county sitting at a table. I've served both on Hardline and on the Planning Commission, and the current structure that's in place right now is not adequate to support, I think, the vision that is being put forth. It's great for its purpose, and they do a good job at what they do, but to take on the description that we're trying to create now, I think it would not be fair to the agency. I think it's extremely important that, as discussed, that there be organization and structure brought forth. Where are we going? How are we going to get there? I think that to have that picture in place, I also think it's important that the members of this organization, no matter how it's created, are elected officials. And I think that's where you get accountability from, not appointments. I've served with people that are appointed, I've served with people that are elected, and there is a difference. I will tell you there certainly is a difference. I think it's extremely important, we mentioned this at the last time, that FDOT be at this table. They're going to be a big part of some of these decisions, and somebody that has decision-making ability, not just a representative of the FDOT. The port was mentioned, depending on how that plays into place. The airport's a component, certainly, and Heartline's already here. But every corner of the county is represented right now at this table. All the cities, the county. In addition to that, it's double representation because some of the county commissioners oversee some areas that the city reps see as well. I just think another important component is what we focused on originally is the community outreach. That is going to be extremely important on the success of the map that we want to put ahead. If there's going to be funding at some point in time, what kind of funding, we want to make sure that it's what the people want. It's not what we want. That I think is extremely important. But it's been a very healthy discussion. I think the leaders at the table have made it very clear that this is a new direction. It's a game changer, as Commissioner Hagan had indicated, and that's what it needs to be. There needs to be some excitement just injected here so we know we're going someplace that we've not been. This whole region is going someplace that it's not been. It's upward and forward. So with that, I'll leave it there, but I think that the discussion today has been extremely healthy and hopefully given some good direction, and I commend Mr. Merrill for bringing this to the forefront when you did. I think it certainly has warranted good results. Thank you.
I'd like to thank you for the great discussion on this. Certainly given us a lot to start working with, and we'll start bringing it back to you. Just like to go to the managers, see if they have any final perspective. Jerry, anything you'd like to say?
We were looking for another assignment, so thank you.
And you got it.
Can you give mine to Jerry?
Mike, any comments you'd like to make?
This is great, great discussion. Know what I need to do, get it back to you, move it forward.
Ray?
I think that we'll have a lot to talk about at our next managers meeting about ideas. I do want to say that one of the strengths, I think, of the Planning Commission in the planning format is that we have all the jurisdictions involved, and I think part of what we need to do is change our criteria more to economic development. That's what we haven't done. When we did the plans before, we were managing growth. When we did transportation, economic development wasn't on the radar. So identifying the projects, I think, is something that we certainly can help with in this discussion. I think helps us understand that economic development should be the top priority that we use.
Greg?
I think it's very heartening as an administrator to listen to your conversation and know that we're on the right track, because I assure you, every single item that you've discussed, we have spent literally hours talking about how this could take shape and how it would best serve the citizens of the county. I do think it's important to remember, and I know time is always the enemy for redevelopment and for economic development activity. It's always a challenge to keep on a timeline, but we've got a huge mountain of data that county staff is working through with the key economic spaces and the competitive sites. Planning Commission staff is involved in that as well. And we want to absolutely bring you the best product that we can. Put that forward and say, these are the projects that we think are really going to make a difference and going to have a bang for the dollar. And we want you to be proud of that. So I think you're going to be pleased with our work over the next several months. Rest assured, your comments have been exactly the same thing that we've talked about. So thank you.
Philip?
I enjoy the fact I'm on the opposite side of the table from my chair. Basically, I agree with Greg. There's been a lot of data that's been developed. It will be developed. It's been in the business a long time, and this has been an interesting process over the last 2 or 3 months. Sometimes I wonder where are we going, and then other times I think, okay, it makes sense. But it's all part of the process of trying to, I don't want to say reinvent the wheel, but at least try to figure out a way to meet what's very important, at least from my perspective. I understand about the economic development. That's what it's all about. Transit and transportation, those are two different terms, really. But from transit and transportation, I've always been trained is that you get the people where they want to go. And you try to get the people where they want to go in the most cost-effective, safest way of doing it. And I hope that we continue on that process. Otherwise, sometimes it may get lost. But
Thank you.
I'm kind of comfortable with it.
Any final comments from the leadership group? I'd like to thank you very much for your time today. We'll see you in February.